Hello and welcome to another video. This time it's about a question I was asked, and I was asked, how did you get so good at shred? Now there's no simple short answer to this, but I will attempt to answer bits of the question. Now if you want a kind of detailed roadmap of how I think anyone can progress as far as they potentially can, I have that kind of thing on my guitar lesson site. You can find the link below. But I'm gonna try to answer some of that today, and some of that stuff pops up on my lesson site as well. If it's not there, it's going to be added later on. Anyway, this is how I got so good at shred. I'm dividing this into two sections, basically, because technique is one part and the other part is kind of more hippie, philosophical. Hippie, yo dude, you gotta listen to music, man. And one part is, like I said, technique. Now, when you're talking about technique, I think what has helped me a lot is that I'm a very competitive person. So I took the technique bit kind of as not at all musical. I wanted to be the best technically. Now, the first really important thing that happened was when my second teacher asked me, what you want to play? My first teacher hadn't really cared, or maybe didn't think to ask that, but my second teacher did, and I said Gary Moore, and that was basically the start of it all. Now my second teacher, when I said Gary Moore, he said, okay, you got to do this. Whoops, haven't been doing that in a while. That's just a basic finger exercise where you do index, middle, ring, pinky, and move on to the next string. And it's very good for coordinating the left and the right hand, or yeah, well, the left and the right hand. And you can do variations on that. You can do so that you start with another finger when you swap or change strings. So you start first with the index finger, and then on the next string you start off with the ring finger, so it becomes. And then you start with the ring finger, and then with the pinky. That's fairly simple, and that becomes like. That's very simple. That becomes like, I can't even play it myself. And then it repeats. That's something from the Steve Vai 30-hour guitar workout. I have that on my website as well. But that's one of the exercises I did, or I did a bunch of exercises like that, and I did 3 fingers and so on. And I had a kind of really sportsman-like attitude to it. It was a competition. It wasn't music. It was purely technique. I didn't think in those terms back then, but now when I look back on it, or I didn't think about it consciously like that back then, but now when I look back on it, I think I must have, because it's not very musical to begin with, but I had a kind of bloody-minded, I want to be the fastest and I want to be the best. So I did that, and I learned my scales, so basically the modes. So when I improvise, I'm thinking in terms of modes most of the time, or at least those are my home base. And so learn your modes. And then I watched the Yngwie Malmsteen REH video, where he showed basically all this stuff. And so I learned all of that, basically most of the stuff on the video, because I was driven. I really had to do it. Now, this is all kind of fairly basic stuff in a way, because It's all technique. I copied my favorite side, spent one summer doing this. In the beginning it sounded probably something like, but I kept at it the whole summer. I remember that quite well. I don't remember how old I was, but that was basically one summer of me doing that. And then other people came along. I kind of learned all the Steve Vai I could. I learned a bunch of Satriani and all that kind of. That was the technical side of the whole thing. But then there was, and that's basically the technical side. Is all. That's all there is to say. You learn as much technique as you can. But for me, that's not really the essence of anything. Like, if I can't just take the technique, because that's shredding in a way. That's very technical playing. But you can't kind of separate that from the rest of the person playing, because then it becomes just meaningless notes, and that could basically just be a sequencer. So if I'm going to try to answer how I became good at shred, that needs to have all the other stuff in there as well, because I don't think in terms of shred. I think in terms of music and what I want to hear. And what I want to hear is very much influenced by everything else kind of that's happened to me as a musician or when I was growing up. Now, a couple of things spring to mind instantly. The first thing is that my second teacher, Sasha was his name, asked me what I wanted to play. Now, if you don't have a teacher like that, swap teachers, seriously. You need a teacher who inspires you and is interested in what you want to play and teaches you that stuff. Secondly, what you want to play is something that you should keep that as your kind of goal all through your musical development and career later on, because you lose sight of it. I spent time playing stuff that I didn't want to play. At times it was because of money, at times it was because of friends playing that stuff. And I could have basically been lost in all that. I mean, they were good experiences, but you can get lost in that if you don't kind of remember that what you want to play is basically why you're playing this thing in the first place. And for me, that means that if I'm not playing what I want to play, something that I like, I could just as easily work in a warehouse, because really, why not? Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep an open mind, and that brings me to my next point, which is musical diversity. You need to be musically diverse. It's easier said than done, because that comes partly from your upbringing. Now, and this is a part of the answer to how I got so good at shred, if I am any good, is that it was not at all down to me. It was dumb luck. It was my parents, because they played all kinds of music at home when I was a kid. So I was exposed to all kinds of stuff at an early age, which meant when I was growing up as a teenager, when I was playing, I wasn't kind of limited to the stuff that you'd expect, like this. So that's kind of important to me, at least, because I listened to all kinds of stuff. I mentioned Steve Vai, I think, and I mentioned Yngwie Malmsteen, Gary Moore, and I also went for the Gary Moore blues stuff. But more than that, I listened to Pat Metheny, I listened to Stevie Ray Vaughan, I listened to Genesis, I listened to an obscure Finnish guy called Pekka Pohjola, I listened to Lionel Richie, I listened to weird fusion stuff, I listened to classical, I listened to, but basically you name it. Genre-wise, there were no boundaries for me. I was extremely critical, and I still am, but the genre doesn't kind of mean anything to me. So that means that I had a huge kind of pool of music to draw from, which meant that whatever style I developed, the style that I have, is something slightly different to what many shredders might have. There are noticeable Yngwie Malmsteen things in there, but because I listened to Danny Gatton a lot at some point, I like to throw in oh, whoops. That's down to basically, I think, my Danny Gatton influence and my Frank Zappa influence, that music should be fun, which, let's be honest, you listen to Yngwie Malmsteen, that's not the influence you're going to get from him. You're going to get tons of good stuff, but it's not really with a smile on your face, if you know what I mean. And also that's kind of come from Devin Townsend as well. So musical diversity is one thing as well, and all of this kind of boils down to whatever it is that I am musically. One other thing that I think was important for me was, of course, you need to practice, and I practiced tons during my youth. But I also took breaks, kind of maybe 2 days off. And I think that was beneficial to me from a musical standpoint, not from a technical standpoint. But it's not a race, even though you should take the technical aspect of it as a race when you're practicing it, because that makes you perform better. But when you get to the kind of the making music bit and learning musicality, if you can learn musicality, what's the word? Kind of learning music. I think it's good to take a break, step back a bit, because you get some distance to what you're doing, and you listen to other stuff. So you take a couple of days off, you listen to music, listen to stuff you're not practicing. And I think that's helped me. You might be different, but for me, I think that was important. That also helped me keep the fun in it, kind of, because I tire sort of easily. Now, that brings me to the next point, which is kind of where I combined technique and music at some point, because I grew bored of all of this stuff. Practicing all of that stuff. I grew bored of it because I've never found licks and or these kind of exercises I've never found them very interesting. I've practiced this enough that I can talk while I play this, which is kind of a fun thing to do. But musically it's not interesting, and I noticed that I got bored doing that. So what I did was I started playing over CDs and even cassettes. Remember those? Now, we didn't really have many backing tracks back then, and there was no internet. So what I did was I just took a CD, learned whatever. It could be a Gary Moore CD, it could be Yngwie Malmsteen, Satriani, whatever. Learned some of the songs, not all of the songs, but the ones I really liked, and then I played over them. And that kind of, and I improvised. So I was practicing actually improvising without thinking of in those terms, but I actually was practicing. And I got a full technical workout as well, especially when I was playing something like Yngwie Malmsteen, because that pushes your technique. And I think that was a key moment for me, because that made me play more. And every time I played something that was technical music, like Steve Vai or Yngwie Malmsteen, I was really developing the technical side of my playing. And but also all of the other skills that you need, my ear was getting better and so on. And that brings me to another point, which is develop your ears. Now, this is probably one of the most important ones, if not the most important one. Ditch tab, forget tab, transcribe stuff. You don't have to transcribe it so that you write it down, but pick it up by ear. So if you have this, wonder what the end of that was. Well, anyway, if you have that, you don't know how that's played, pick up your guitar, press play, and pick it up, and then you can do whatever, depending on the difficulty. Now, I didn't let difficulty kind of get in the way. I tried to transcribe really difficult stuff very early on, but it didn't bother me. I got half of it probably terribly wrong, but it was good for my ears, and I think that's kind of key. So tab can be good for some stuff if you want to take a shortcut, because you can't just transcribe everything, or at least I couldn't transcribe everything all of the time, because I like shortcuts now and then, but I did transcribe lots. So that's been good, and I've done other stuff that's been beneficial for my ears later on. I've played in bands where I don't have the sheet music, so I don't know what's going on, so I just try to follow the bass player, and I've gotten really good at that. So anything that you can do that helps your ears is good. I have a bunch of tips on that as well on my website, but that's kind of the short answer to how I got good at shredding. Always wanted to have fun with it. I always, now I think I'm making it sound like it was a very conscious kind of road taken by me. This was all very accidental. I'm not that clever. But I have analyzed it looking back, and I think that I have been lucky in kind of having a broad outlook from the start, and I've sort of stumbled across things that I think are important in any kind of musical setting, and I've stumbled across them early enough that I know how to do some of that stuff as well. So the technique side is one thing, but I think the other stuff is more important. So how do you get good at shred? Well, I don't know. Try to be open-minded, try to practice, but don't practice yourself to death. And this all, of course, depends on how old you are. You can, and the time you have available, but you can steal some time from, if you have kids, I know you can't sit around doing this in the night. Okay, that one was better. And that's another thing. Don't worry about your mistakes so much. I mean, just do it. Now, that's it. Practice, 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 but take breaks. And like I said, yeah, I was saying that you can practice stuff even if your kids are asleep by just practicing. Might not sound great, but you get a good workout that way. And most of it's dumb luck anyway, because the technical side, you have a kind of predisposition towards certain things. So some people can become great athletes, some people can't. Some people can become technically really proficient on the instrument, like for instance, fast. Some people maybe don't have it. But that being said, I think it's just a small percentage of your total what you are when you grow up to be a musician and you're a full-grown developed musician, you don't stop developing ever. But I think the kind of talent part of it is very small, and we give it way too much or big of an importance, when we should think more in terms of how hard we work for it. The best guitar players have really worked for it. Yngwie Malmsteen, I heard the story that he went to sleep with the guitar and doing this, and then he fell asleep, and then he woke up and was doing or something, and he would pour cereal in a bowl and his left hand would be going. And I never did that, but still. So the best ones really, really work at it. So don't be discouraged by having short fingers. Danny Gatson had short fingers. Django Reinhardt, he was missing fingers. So just keep at it. Believe in yourself and try to be musically diverse and work at it and have fun with it. And then you might get there. I don't know if I am. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want kind of real proper lessons on this stuff, you can find them on my website, the links below. And it is a slightly pricey course, maybe, but on the other hand, it has tons of stuff in it, and if it doesn't work, well, you get your money back. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Hope to see you in another one, and now I'll go back to